Okay, so here are some things to discuss about taking title. Uh, First one, what is the role of a co-borrower exactly?
Yeah, so a co-borrower is basically someone who is used on the loan as part of the qualification process. The most common co-borrower is obviously spouses, right? But a non-spouse co-borrower is a real challenge in a VA assumption, primarily because the VA guarantee um, for that loan, which is what makes VA attractive to lenders because they basically have a government entity guarantee on a default on that loan, it gets limited to the percentage of the owners that has the VA entitlement that is living in the property. It gets limited to them. So, like if you had a co-borrower who was, let's say, a family member, not a non-spouse, this doesn't apply to a spouse at all, but was a family member like a father or I don't know, an uncle or anybody, right? They are the 50% of that buying group, but they don't live in that property, the guarantee is then reduced to only 50% of that loan. So lenders do not like it. So basically, it's really not possible to do a VA loan or a VA assumption with a non-owner occupying co-borrower, right? Spouse, not an issue at all. They don't have to be veterans or anything like that. So yeah, so you're really stuck. You have to qualify for this um, on yourself with your spouse if you've got one to be able to do this. You can't go out and get outside help. Now that is different though in FHA assumptions. FHA doesn't have any kind of guarantee about who occupies. If somebody's willing to be a co-borrower on an FHA, you can do that. So
Oh, that's very interesting. To circle back around though to the VA, you said non-owner occupied. What if the buyer was, say, moving in with their elderly mother and wanted to put that mother on the title or on the loan for the assumption, and they were going to live with them?
yeah, that is doable.
Okay, perfect. All right. So the next thing would be, what about buying? Well, you kind of already addressed this, but for those who are investors, I've been asked, can they purchase an assumption as an entity like an LLC?
They really can't, right? When you do any kind of VA government-backed loan, that loan is tied to an individual because VA, remember, is primarily for an owner-occupant when they are buying it the first time. Now, you can do
Owner.
non-owner occupied assumptions if the entitlement is left by the seller, but that investor doing that scenario would have to do the assumption in their name, not the name of their LLC, because that loan has to get tied to somebody, not some entity that is not the person, right? So you're really not going to be able to do that. Now, um, what happens after the assumption is complete? That's kind of a gray area, whether or not people change the title. But most investors are generally not looking, at least larger scale investors are generally not looking to put property in their own personal name.
Hmm.
It's just a legal protection that is common. So that's why I think another reason we see a lot fewer investor assumptions that take place. But the smaller ones, that are okay with putting, one or two properties in their name and going that way, it can be done. But once again, the key is entitlement staying from the seller with the property.
Now, Craig, is that also true with an FHA that an LLC would not be able
You
to
you
assume?
can't you actually can't do on FHA, you can't do an investor assumption. So it's not a thing at all.
Okay.
It's owner occupant only.
Okay, good clarification. And then that brings us to the last part, the
Well,
occupancy requirements, which you did kind of touch on.
so maybe before we answer that last question, one thing I think let's just clarify too, though, if you are buying as an owner occupant, you are allowed later to put it in a trust, though. So
Yeah, I mean,
that
Oh, yeah,
once
good
again,
point.
what you do with your deed post purchase, there's a lot of flexibility there. Now, the one thing I do want to hammer, especially as we're talking with occupancy requirements on this question, right? Like, do not commit loan fraud. The
yeah,
VA is becoming quite aware that there is a rise of people buying as owner occupants and assumptions without the intention of owner occupancy.
yeah.
Um, and that is really a no-no. Like you want to end up in jail. That's a great way to do it, right? If you're going to do an assumption, um, do it straight. You know, tell people I'm going to live in this or I'm not going to live in this, right? You know, obviously with occupancy requirement for entitlement to swap, um, you know, you have to have the VA entitlement as the buyer and the seller, and you have to be living in the property as your primary residence when you close. The rule with regards to how long you have to live in is more murky, right? It's more about intent. People's life circumstances change. I mean, think of service members who move to an area and then their duty station changes rapidly and they have to ship out somewhere else. It may not make sense to sell the home, so they have to turn it into a rental, right? I personally think, you know, if your intention is I'm going to live in the house, but I do want it to be a rental someday, I would really want to just say I'm going to be here for at least a minimum of a year, right? But life circumstances can change and you can go that route from there. I don't know. Any other things you want to cover on this, Randy?
I'll just finish that. You know, if you change title after the fact, just know that the lender can exercise their due on sale clause, which is in the loan documents that you're signing. So that's the challenge you run into. And of course, you know, there's a lot of talk out there like, oh, they don't ever do it. It has happened. I've heard of
Yeah.
very, very few of them. You don't want to be that person, maybe.
Now, I will say though, in the case of a trust, though, there is a legal precedent for moving a property into a trust that does not trigger the due on sale clause, but moving the property from your name to ABC
LLC.
Rentals LLC
Yeah,
would probably be something that the lender could go, nope, we're going to
that's
call that.
yep. That's what I wanted to cover. So perfect. We're
Okay.
good.
All right. Well, thank you, Randy and Craig, for joining us for this Q&A.